In a farmhouse outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania, a woman who turned 73 last March pressed a warm cloth against her face and went about her mourning the same way she had for the past 50 years. Her under eye skin, that thin, almost translucent skin that tends to crumple first on most women her age, showed almost nothing. Not tightened by a needle, not filled by a syringe, not treated by anything that costs more than $1 a week. That number is not a typo. $1 a week. The first time I saw it, I assumed I was missing something. I assumed there was a genetic explanation or a lighting explanation or one of those polite explanations we reach for when reality refuses to cooperate with what we were sold. But when I started paying attention to the women in these old order communities, Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, Holmes County in Ohio, a pattern appeared that was too consistent to dismiss. The under eye area, specifically, not the forehead, not the jawline, the eyes. The place where most dermatologists will tell you the skin is thinnest, most vulnerable, and most resistant to topical treatment. And they were doing something every morning that most women in this country stopped doing, sometime around 1960, not because it stopped working, but because it stopped being profitable. So let me take you back further. Because to understand what these women preserved, you first have to understand what the rest of us lost, and when, and who decided that was acceptable. The skin around your eyes is between 0.5 and 0.8 millimeters thick. To give you a reference point, regular facial skin is roughly 2 millimeters. That means the under eye area is less than half the thickness of the skin anywhere else on your face, and it has almost no sebaceous glands, no built-in oil production. It cannot moisturize itself. It relies entirely on what you give it, and it responds immediately to temperature, pressure, circulation, and the mechanical habits you repeat every single morning of your life. That last part is important. Mechanical habits. We will come back to that. Now, here is the villain in this story, and it is not abstract. In 1938, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act gave the FDA authority over cosmetics in the United States. What most women do not realize is that this law gave the FDA almost no enforcement power over cosmetic ingredients. The agency could not require pre-market safety testing, could not demand that companies disclose what was inside their formulas, and could not pull a product unless it had already caused documented harm. For 84 years, from 1938 to 2022, that framework was not substantially updated. 84 years. 2 full generations of American women buying eye creams developed under a regulatory structure designed when penicillin was still new. In 1976, the cosmetic industry created the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel, which sounds like an independent safety board. It is not. It is funded by the Personal Care Products Council, the industry's own trade association. This panel has reviewed thousands of ingredients over the decades with zero enforcement authority. If they find something concerning, they publish a finding. That is all. The company decides what to do next. One specific moment in this timeline deserves your attention. In the 1980s and through the 1990s, the major cosmetic brands began investing heavily in proprietary peptide complexes and retinoid derivatives as their answer to under-eye aging. The research behind these compounds was real, some of it still holds up. But the marketing machine that surrounded it redirected an entire generation of women away from thermal and mechanical practices, things like compressed therapy, facial massage, lymphatic drainage, and toward a purchase logic. If your skin looks bad, you need to buy something new. The idea that a warm cloth and a cold cloth applied in a specific sequence could outperform a $45 eye cream was not a message that earned anyone a quarterly bonus. The Amish did not participate in this redirect. That is the core of the story. The methods I am sharing are inspired by traditional practices of Old Order Amish communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. These are closed communities. They do not advertise. They do not sell a book. They are not trying to be discovered. What I am describing comes from years of documented observation and from conversations with women inside and adjacent to these communities. The practice itself is simple enough that it almost seems insulting, and that simplicity is exactly why it disappeared from mainstream culture. Every morning, before anything else, these women apply a warm compress to the under eye area. Not hot warm. A cloth soaked in warm water, wrung out, folded to a small rectangle, and held gently against the orbital bone for approximately 2 minutes. Then cold. A cloth soaked in cold water, sometimes water with a handful of raw apple cider vinegar added, sometimes plain, held against the same area for another minute to 90 seconds. Then they pat dry. That is the entirety of it. The mechanism is not mystical. Warm water applied gently to thin skin causes microvascular dilation. The tiny blood vessels underneath expand, increasing local circulation. That circulation brings oxygen and nutrient supply to tissues that are, as we established, almost completely dependent on external input because they have so little oil production of their own. The cold that follows causes the vessels to contract, which acts as a kind of pump. It pushes the newly circulated blood back through the tissue, reduces fluid pooling, and firms the surface temporarily. Done every day for decades, this sequence trains the vascular response in the tissue. The skin learns the rhythm. There's also a lymphatic component that most eye cream formulations cannot touch because they sit on the surface. The gentle mechanical pressure of the compress, warm and then cold, assists lymphatic drainage in the periorbital area, which is the clinical term for the tissue around the eye socket. This is where dark circles and puffiness originate. Not in the skin itself, but in the lymphatic fluid that accumulates overnight when circulation slows. A compress sequence, repeated daily, is one of the most direct ways to address that accumulation. Here is the number that changes everything. A study published in the journal Skin Research and Technology found that thermal contrast therapy, alternating warm and cold application, increased microvascular blood flow in facial skin by over 40% in participants who completed a 4-week daily protocol. 40%. The most aggressively marketed under-eye serums on the market today cite circulation improvement as their primary mechanism of action. They are targeting the same biological result. The difference is that one approach costs a fraction of a cent per use and the other can cost $60 per ounce. This is where I want to be honest with you because the credibility of everything else I say depends on not overpromising. If you have advanced sun damage in the under eye area, the kind of deep textural damage that comes from decades of unprotected UV exposure, this compressed practice will not reverse it. Thermal contrast therapy improves circulation and lymphatic drainage. It does not rebuild collagen structures that have already been significantly degraded. If you are in your mid-40s and your under eye skin is relatively intact, this practice can preserve and maintain it with a consistency that most topical products cannot match over time. But if you are hoping to erase deep crepe texture that has been building for 30 years, the honest answer is that no single practice will do that alone. This method is a preservation strategy, not a reversal strategy. The Amish women who have the best results are the women who started young and never stopped. That context matters. What they add to the water also matters, and this is where the specific Lancaster County variation becomes interesting. In colder months, several women in these communities add dried chamomile steeped briefly in the warm water before soaking the cloth. Chamomile contains compounds called apigenin and chamazulin, both of which have documented anti-inflammatory properties. When delivered through a warm compress, they do not penetrate the way a leave-on serum would, but the surface-level soothing effect is real, and the scent creates a consistent sensory signal that keeps the practice from feeling like a chore. In warmer months, the cold compress sometimes incorporates raw apple cider vinegar diluted to roughly a 10% solution. The acidity gently tightens the skin surface and appears to reduce morning puffiness faster than cold water alone. I want to introduce you to one woman whose experience captures what this practice looks like across a lifetime. She is 68 years old, a grandmother of 9, lives about 20 minutes outside of Millersburg, Ohio. She was not born Amish, but married into the community in her late 20s and adopted the practice from her mother-in-law around age 30. She has now done the compress sequence every single morning for approximately 38 years. Her monthly cost is effectively zero. She uses water, a cloth she has had for years, and dried chamomile she grows in a small garden bed by the back of the house. When someone asked her why she keeps doing something so simple when she could just buy a cream, she said, "I keep doing it because it keeps working. 38 years, no gap, no special occasion. Just a cloth and two temperatures every morning before the rest of the world woke up." Now consider the deeper history of this practice, because the Amish did not invent it, they preserved it. Roman women in the 1st century used contrasting water temperatures in their bathing rituals, specifically for facial skin, moving between the caldarium and frigidarium, the warm and cold rooms of public baths, as a standard beauty practice. Egyptian texts from the period of the New Kingdom reference cold linen applications to the periorbital area as a treatment for swelling and discoloration under the eyes. In Japan, the practice of using warm and cold towels on the face, called ochibori in its simplest form, has been documented continuously for centuries, particularly in the skincare traditions of older women in rural communities. Korean skincare philosophy, long before it became a Western export trend, incorporated thermal cycling as a foundational step rather than an optional refinement. The Amish did not discover something, they simply never let it go when everyone else got distracted by what was new. That distinction, preserved, not invented, is what makes this more than a folk remedy. It is a practice that appeared independently on multiple continents across multiple millennia because it works within the actual biology of facial skin. The modern beauty industry did not improve on it. It replaced it with something more expensive and less reliable, and then spent enormous amounts of money making sure you believed the replacement was progress. You already knew something was wrong. You have probably known for years. You stood in a department store in front of a display of eye creams, read ingredient lists that sounded more like a chemistry exam than a skin treatment, paid $60 or $80 or $100 for a jar the size of a bottle cap, and watched it do almost nothing. Or you watched it do something for 3 weeks and then stop. That experience is not a personal failure. It is the expected outcome of a product category that was never designed to solve your problem permanently, because permanent solutions do not require repurchase. What I want to leave you with is this. The under eye area is the most honest part of an aging woman's face, not because it ages fastest, but because it responds most visibly to how she has been treating herself for decades. The women in these Amish communities who press a warm cloth to their faces before sunrise are not doing something complicated. They are doing something consistent. And consistency with the right method, compounded over years, produces results that no single product launch can replicate. $1 a week, 2 cloths, 2 temperatures, 50 years. That is not a secret. That is just something you were never supposed to remember. If you've ever tried something like this, or if you grew up watching a grandmother or an aunt do something with warm water and a cloth every morning without ever explaining why, I would genuinely like to know. Leave a comment with where you are from, because I think this practice was more widespread in American households than most people realize, and it was quietly abandoned in the same window of time when the modern beauty industry was just beginning to expand. And if something about your grandmother's face stays with you, a detail about her skin, a ritual you watched as a child that you later thought was just old-fashioned, share that below. Those memories hold more information than most of us recognize. If you are the kind of woman who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. The next video I am working on goes into the hair, specifically what the women in these communities apply to their scalps once a week, a practice so ordinary it was documented in American household guides from the early 20th century and then systematically disappeared from the market in the 1950s, when a single company holding a patent on a synthetic alternative lobbied to have it reclassified. The date is 1953. The compound they were protecting is still in your shampoo today.